Hey, welcome back to jaredbodine.com, the tech you need to know. Today, we're going to look at something that is directly related to certification, Windows installation, which is mapping to the CompTIA A+ 1102 exam. This is objective 1.9. Given a scenario, perform OS installation and upgrade in a diverse OS environment. We're just going to focus on some of the small basics of getting your computer ready and installing Windows 10 or 11, because both are kind of current at this time. So let's jump right in. First, you're going to need to figure out how you're going to get this operating system onto your system. You're going to need some installation media. Media is a generic term, but in this case, we're referring to physical or even not even physical anymore with the way that it's moving into digital. But it's the stuff you're using to install. Traditionally, a lot of people were using DVDs. I actually have some really cool ones here. This one is Windows XP 64-bit version, which is kind of a rarity, really. There wasn't a lot of people that had 64-bit version of Windows XP. So here's a cool pressed one of that. I even have the one after that, Windows Vista, codenamed Longhorn, and then replaced with the name Vista. And let me take out my copy of it so you can see it in all of its glory. Ooh. And I even got the fancy case that came with it here. And when that was outdated, Windows 7. This is my Windows 7 Home. I do have a Pro version, but it's on my bookshelf, and I didn't feel like fetching that one down for you. And there's my Windows 7, but it's not just Home, it's Home Premium. I don't know really anymore what the difference was between them. Well, I guess it says in the back here. Home Premium was just Home. There was another version, because after that was Professional and Ultimate. Those are the Windows 7 versions. Anyway, that is your optical disc. But nowadays, most people are installing, if they have a physical media, through one of these guys, a USB flash drive. That is kind of the easiest, most common way people are doing it these days. Also, you can do something called a Pixie boot. It's spelled PXE, and that's when you boot through the network. It's pretty easy to do. You just need to have the right equipment and a server set up ready to roll. Most home users, you're not going to have that. But in a workplace environment, in a Fortune 500 company, or even a pretty, medium to large scale IT office, you're going to have a Pixie boot option. And of course, legacy, we always had the floppies. Ooh, I just thought about it. Do I have a floppy here to show you? I was thinking about having some floppies handy. And I always have a messy desk. There's usually some legacy equipment somewhere on my desk. Ah, here's my floppy. See, I knew there would be something like that nearby. And the old school floppy. Ah, the memories. This particular floppy has a document on it that's my mini disc collection. Yeah, I kid you not. Also, it has my movie collection as a list and my CD collection listed out, so I could keep track of my media, my movies, music, and yes, my mini disc collection. Very important flop. You got to keep that one handy. You never know. So those are installation media. How do you get the installation media? Well, a lot of people would think you go out and buy it. And yes, you can. But nowadays, most people are going to make it themselves. I'm going to skip that slide and come back to this. So I'm going to make my own media most of the time. And that's where the flash drives come into play. One of the easiest and Windows recommended ways to do it is using the Windows Media Creation tool. This is used for Windows 10 and 11. It's really easy to use. The pictures and the screenshots I have here are from Windows 11, but it looks almost identical for Windows 10. When you first download the program, people think, oh, that's it. I have just created a Windows 10 or 11 media. No, you've just downloaded the program. And then when you run the program, it'll ask you, how do you want to do this? Do you want to make a USB flash drive, or do you want to download the ISO file? The ISO file is basically all of the files, all of the components in a single one file. It's compressed, and that ISO file can be used to be burned onto a DVD if you want to make a physical disk for it, or you can make a virtual disk out of an ISO with some other tools that I'll talk about in a second. So in this case, I would say, unless you really know what you're doing, the easiest method is click on the top option, USB flash drive. Then you're going to put your flash drive in there. It does need to be at least 8 gigabytes in size, and make sure there's nothing else on the drive at the time, or at least nothing you care about. Because once it finishes downloading all the files that it needs, that big ISO file, now it's all on your system, it's going to wipe this flash drive clean. And the only thing left on this flash drive when it's done will be the Windows installation files. Now, you can keep those files on there and then continue to use your flash drive for other things. You can put other stuff on there afterwards, but anything that's on there before you turn this into a media recovery, it's gone. It's going to be clobbered. If you decide to go with the ISO format, you can use a program like, I don't know, Nero, Roxy, if you have any of those old school burner programs. And you can turn that ISO file into recovery disk. Another popular option is a program called Rufus. Rufus is a third-party program, and it'll take any ISO file, well, just about any ISO file, and help you turn that into a bootable installation media. I have had some students that really want to download the ISO and then use Rufus to come out with the exact same thing you would get by just choosing the first option. So I don't know why, but I have used Rufus to make it these installation medias for Linux computers. You know, if you want to make a Ubuntu install drive, then that's when I'd bust out the third-party programs like Rufus. So once we have our media made, now we have to get it into the computer. The biggest mistake that people make is they don't know how to force the computer to load from this new install media because it keeps on going back to the hard drive. So this is where you need to enter the BIOS/UEFI. Now, I did say BIOS, but let's be real. No one is actually using BIOS anymore. Even if they think they are, they're actually not. They are using UEFI. UEFI is the new version that replaced BIOS. You really don't have both on a system. It's just a newer, greater version of BIOS. It's a 64-bit friendly, and actually it has to be 64-bit. And if you're installing Windows 11, I can pretty much guarantee your computer is UEFI and not BIOS, but I still use the term BIOS just because that's what people are used to. So you have to enter your BIOS. The way to do that is turn your computer off, and as it turns back on, you have to interrupt the regular turning on process, the booting process. Most computers use F12, delete, escape. Those are probably the 3 most common, but you have to figure it out and research for your own computer because it does vary. Once you're in, like the screenshot there shows, you have to pick, what do you want to be your I should really script this. Your first boot device. In this case, you're going to want to choose, if you're using the flash drive here, USB hard drive or USB media, something like that. The verbiage again changes based on your UEFI version. You might not even want to make that a permanent change. What I've seen happen with some people is when they install Windows, because they made the permanent change in BIOS or UEFI to always boot to the flash drive first, is after it's done installing, it reboots, goes back to this. And they're like, huh, I guess it didn't work. And they do it again. And again, I have seen people reinstall Windows like 3 or 4 times before they realize they should have just taken this flash drive out after the first successful install. So to avoid doing that reinstallation loop by accident, you may want to leave your boot device order the way it is, and instead there's another option that most UEFIs do support, and that is a one-time boot option. So when your computer is turning on, if you interrupt the right key at the right time, instead of going into the UEFI settings and making a permanent change, you can instead say, hey, this one time, let's just boot to this flash drive. And that way, things are a little smoother after the install. On a lot of computers I see it's F10, but I do deal a lot with Dell. So I can't tell you if that's the same for all the manufacturers. It's definitely not even the same for all Dells. So be prepared to experiment a little bit with what those codes are. All right, once we're starting to install, then we have this process here of, okay, what are we going to do? Once the computer loads to the flash drive, you're going to be faced with some options. Now, a lot of the average users are just going to pick the default option. The first one, upgrade. If you're tech savvy enough to be watching this video, you're now an advanced user. So you should be using the custom option, which in parentheses says advanced, because we're now doing things in the advanced way. Usually, if you're installing Windows, you don't want to just reinstall on the same system. I mean, there's times when you want to do that, but for the purposes of the things that I'm teaching, the things that we cover, you're probably going to want to do what's called a clean install, which will erase and write over your old Windows and just completely clobber what was on there before. So we're going to click on Advanced. When you do that, one of the options you will get is choosing which physical disk and which partition on the disk to do. Now, you might look at this picture and say, hey, there are 3 hard drives inside my computer. No. What you're seeing is one physical disk that is split into 3 logical pieces or partitions. You'll notice it says drive 0 and then partition 1, drive 0, partition 2, and so on. So that means we're actually looking at one disk. My guess is it's probably a solid state drive, so it's not even a hard drive. Hard drives are the old spinners. This is a solid state drive probably. So what I like to do is if I know I don't want any of this garbage on there anymore, I want a clean house. I'm not trying to save a recovery partition. I don't want to save any existing gunk. So I will usually delete every single one of those partitions. I'll go through the list, highlight one of them, and then click on delete there at the bottom. And I'll do that for all of them. As you delete your partitions, they will slowly merge back into a single partition. Once they're all deleted, I click next. From there, it might ask you to put in a CD key. Now, if you have the CD key and you know what it is, fine, type it on in. But the really cool thing is, especially if this is installation, or if it's like one of those Dells and HPs and Lenovos that already came with a license for Windows, you're really not going to have to install it with that key again and again. Usually the system's already been activated, or if you know it has been activated, you could just click on, I don't have a product key there on the bottom. I have it circled in red, but it won't actually be in red when you're using it. And that'll just skip past this altogether. If it doesn't work, if your system barks at you and says, hey, this is not activated, that's fine. You can go back and add the key in later once Windows is installed. So I usually prefer to skip this screen altogether and just say I don't have a key. Either A, it'll let me put a key in later if I need it, or B, it'll activate automatically anyway, and I didn't need to waste time putting in the key. So that's my recommendation, but I do still recommend using a legitimate copy of Windows. Another option that freaks people out a little bit is this screen right here. Oh my gosh, there's like 100 versions of Windows. Which one do I do? And you might be thinking, well, this is just Windows 11, right? Why am I seeing 100 different copies of Windows 11? Well, your computer doesn't always know which type of Windows 11 you have. Home, Education, Pro, Enterprise, and even that, there is variance within there. You might notice on my screen, there's a Home N, there's an Education, Education N, Pro, Pro N. The N, by the way, just means that you're not installing multimedia stuff. So it kind of, I hate to use this term, neuters it down a little bit. It takes out some of the frills that Windows has baked into it. I usually will not get the N version unless I really know I need it. Now, the question is, which one of these do you choose? Now, this is where it matters on what kind of version you have licensed. If you get this screen, that means you can install any version you want. But if your computer was previously licensed for Pro and you install Home, it will not activate. Same thing goes the other way around. If it was licensed for Home and you click Pro, it won't activate. Or did I get that? You get my point. You must install the version that you have the license for. Otherwise, it won't work. There is one benefit to typing in the CD key that I skipped earlier, and that is the key will usually identify what version of Windows it is, so you don't have to be faced with this question. But I usually know what version it is I'm going for, so I don't have that problem. Make sure you do the correct version that you are licensed for: Home, Education, Pro, Enterprise, etc. Once everything is all done, you start getting that, hey, welcome, we're glad you're here. This is what the Windows 11 version looks like. And the first question I get here from students is, I'm doing this at a school, so I guess I should do setup for school or work account? No. Only if you want the computer you're working on to be managed by the school. In a lot of cases, if you're doing this for a lab where you have a classroom and you have these labs, you're going to be working on these computers and you're going to be acting as the administrator. You don't want the school to be managing this, right? You don't want your workplace to be managing this. It's your computer for labs and whatnot. So I would select setup for personal use. Unless you know for a fact that you're an IT person setting this up for your organization, you're going to want to use setup for personal use. That should be your default. The other question I get is about the single sign-on. Once you get to the next step, it's going to say, hey, do you want to link this to your Microsoft account? In my classes, the answer is no, because these are my lab computers and I don't want them linked to your personal Microsoft account. Okay, these are not yours to keep forever. They're just yours for now. If it's a personal computer for your home, then sure, go ahead if you want, link it. It's up to you. But I would definitely recommend in a school environment for labs and whatnot, do not link it to your Microsoft account. Now, Microsoft is very persistent. They are going to try to force you to link it to a Microsoft account. There are options to say no, use an offline account. You have to get a little creative. You have to look around. Sometimes you even have to install Windows without the network connected just to make sure it doesn't bother you to keep doing it. They'll even say it's a limited experience. Are you sure? Yes. Say I want the limited experience. I don't want this linked to my Microsoft account, my single sign-on options. You can still sign into Microsoft, the store, and add apps. You can still link individual programs inside the operating system later. You don't have to link the entire hardware, the whole PC, to a Microsoft account. Be careful on making that decision if you really want to do that or not. And if it's in a lab environment, absolutely don't do that because it's not yours to keep. All right, this is the basic introduction on Windows installation and pre-installation. I hope you found this useful. This has been a presentation of jaredbodine.com, the tech you need to know.